Thank you, Senator Kennedy. Good to be with all of you. Mr. Duva, thank you for the time in my office with you. I wanted to ask you a couple questions. We know from personal experience about what used to be called the U.S. Attorney's Manual and is now called the Justice Manual. Will you adhere to and enforce the procedures and processes of the Justice Manual as Criminal Division Chief?
Senator Whitehouse, thank you for your time yesterday in your office. I really enjoyed our conversation. I thought it was open and honest. Yes, I will do that. There has been a contacts policy in force really driven by pressure from this committee, going all the way back to when Senator Hatch chaired it under the Reno Department of Justice, that limits the people who can talk to each other about criminal cases to a very, very few at the top of the White House and to a very, very few at the top of the Department of Justice. And as we discussed, the obvious reason for that is to protect the department and indeed the White House from junior G-men squirrels in the White House or in the Department of Justice from cooking up mischief that their seniors, the people who are publicly accountable, aren't aware of. And that mischief is at its worst and at its most dangerous if it's coming through criminal prosecutions that aren't well-founded and haven't followed proper process and procedure. What is your understanding of the current contacts policy of the Department of Justice, and will you adhere to that and make sure your staff adheres to that? Senator, I believe that policy is being evaluated by the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General. I believe at the beginning of this administration, there was a blanket memo that rescinded prior policies, including the contacts policy. I believe that was part of it, but there is going to be one forthcoming. I will abide by the policy, and I will expand on that. And as cases rise up through the criminal division for my evaluation, I will be speaking with my counterparts at the law enforcement agencies at my level about those cases. And if there's any inquiries from the White House over to the criminal division, I will be following the policy, which I'm sure will be along the lines of what you're talking about, very few people in the DOJ talking to very few people in the White House about specific cases.
Well, I would urge your DOJ handlers here to be sure to let the committee know as quickly as possible when that forthcoming thing comes forth, because frankly, I don't think this committee was aware officially until now that this was a lapse in many decades of a contacts policy. I think the only previous lapse was under Attorney General Gonzalez, and that did not work out well for him. You mentioned earlier that you have prosecuted, in fact, we discussed that you had prosecuted or at least investigated cases of threats against judges. As you know, there's been a plague of threats against judges. I want to make sure that you will commit that you will follow the evidence where it leads, which includes potential orchestration of those threats. In some cases, it is not enough to simply investigate the individual who uttered the threat. In some cases, the evidence suggests that somebody is behind a pattern of threats, either as an enterprise or as a conspiracy or in some other fashion. And I've been unable to get any reassurance from the Department of Justice that they will investigate orchestration of threats where there is predication of that orchestration. Will you?
You go where the evidence takes you, Senator. I prosecuted cases, threats against judges, as I mentioned before, whether they're solo threats or otherwise, and you evaluate where the case takes you. Threats from any group towards judges, legislators, executives, anybody is inappropriate, no matter where the orchestration occurs. So you follow the evidence just like you do in a drug case, just like you do in a corruption case. You follow the evidence where it leads, and that's exactly what we will do in the criminal division, not just in those kind of cases, but all cases.
Well, my concern is that there's a ban somehow on investigating that the Marshal Service is being discouraged from pursuing those cases, that the FBI, to which the Marshal Service usually hands off cases, is being discouraged. So keep an eye out for that, because that would be highly improper.
Yes, sir.
Last, and I hope this is something we can work together on, Senator Graham and I
support a piece of legislation that allows for what you and I would call in rem proceedings against assets. And as you and I both know, right now, under U.S. law, asset seizure up to $500,000 can be prosecuted against the asset, in rem, against the thing. And that's why we have cases all over the place with weird names like United States versus $40,000 from the trunk of a 1979 Chevelle. Because the asset is the target, notice goes to the world, and anybody can come in and challenge the seizure of that asset, but you don't have to go through enormous effort to show ownership. You do it the other way around. Where this really comes to bear is where we're dealing with corrupt foreign criminals who have huge assets but have spent a lot of time hiding those assets behind all sorts of different legal screens. Cypriot bank accounts, Dakota trusts, Cayman Islands fake corporations, all of that. So I will ask you, and I'll follow up with a question for the record because I have gone over my time now. I will ask you to take a good hard look at whether the work of the Marshal Service seizing these very expensive assets would not be simplified quite a lot by letting the proceedings be pursued in rem, and ask for an explanation of why a foreign criminal or kleptocrat should have more rights in the U.S. court system for a billion-dollar asset than a regular, ordinary American does with respect to their property up to $500,000. So let's take that under advisement so you have a chance to reflect on it. We would like to pass that bill. We would like to get technical assistance from the department and its support for it. And thank you.
Thank you, Senator.